recorded at Get a Grip Studios in Toronto, Canada, a Get a Grip management production and in association with the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. Financially supported by the good folks at the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, this is Restoring Darkness podcast.
This episode of Restoring Darkness is brought to you by Evluma. If you're serious about contributing to the reduction of light pollution, go to evluma.com, hover over products, and click on Dark Sky Friendly Lighting. Both the OmniMax and AreaMax lights are International Dark Sky Association certified. The warmer color temperatures of the OmniMax reduce the more easily scattered blue wavelengths, which contribute to glare and sky glow. With AreaMax lights, you get full cutoff, which also means no uplight and a significantly reduced contribution to sky glow. And all of Evluma's outdoor lighting product lines come with dimmable drivers for even more control. If your customer is looking for dark sky-friendly fixtures with energy savings while still meeting the demands of decorative lighting, look no further than Evluma. Evluma, illuminating the pursuit of dark skies.
Welcome back to the Restoring Darkness podcast. You know, we've been technical for a while here. I think we're going to go into a little bit of the spiritual with Mark Westmoquette. He's a mindful stargazing expert. I like that title. An astronomer, an author, and a Zen teacher. Mark holds a PhD in astrophysics and was a professional astronomer before switching gears and now teaches yoga and mindfulness full-time. Mark has been studying Zen with Zen Master Daizan Skinner from Zenways for over 10 years. In 2015, he spent a period as a Zen monk, and in 2016 was given permission to teach Dharma. He is the author of 3 books about mindful stargazing: Mindful Thoughts for Stargazing 2019, Stars, A Practical Guide to the Key Constellations, and The Mindfulness Universe 2020. His latest book, Zen and the Art of Dealing with Difficult People, was published last year. You can find all his social media and links to buy his books on the restoringdarkness.com website. But right now, it's my pleasure to be with Mark. How are you, Mark?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, great to be here.
So this movement, the darkness restoration and preservation movement, is it's kind of evolving, some like night restoration, darkness for night, we're kind of working on it, has a massive spiritual element. In your practice, in your Zen practice, and in your coaching and your teaching, how do you incorporate that into what you're trying to help with mindfulness and that?
Yeah, I think considering the night sky and the nighttime environment, for most people, especially when it comes to like your mindfulness practice, is so far out of what people would normally associate with mindfulness. And, it's like we've got the whole day waking hours and all we do in the daytime. And the nighttime, as I'm sure you're aware, like nighttime, we're mostly asleep and we sort of forget that the night even exists.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you live in a city and the lights and things like that. So kind of bringing people's attention to the fact that we can go out at nighttime and practice mindfulness, practice being in our present moment experience, practice being like there present with the sounds and the breeze, but also the beautiful sky just as it is, can open up. I feel like I've found it opens up a whole new window, on people's experience of how you can be present with your environment.
I think Ray Charles said the nighttime is the right time, right? To be with the one you love. But also I think it's also to, the embracing of darkness. Like it's almost, if you look at it from a religious perspective or an anthropological perspective, or this fear of the night, what lurks out in the night. And, while we were conquering the night, while we were introducing electric light into our lives, yes, we introduced more safety. I'm not going to make the argument that electric light at night does not increase safety. It does. But there is something that was lost when we did that. Yes, we were afraid of the night, but we were also awe-inspired by beautiful starlit skies. We told stories around campfires where we were coming to stay safe. So we've, in our conquering of that fear with electric light, we've also lost something incrementally and that our grandparents knew well and our great grandparents knew well. Is there a path to rediscovery of this, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with what you're saying, and I perhaps might extend it to further and say, um, if you look back into the history of humanity, like from the beginning, maybe 200 or 300,000 years of human Homo sapiens, then over those hundreds of thousands of years, it's only been the last, I don't know, 100 years where we've been,
Hmm.
in this kind of lit environment where we've had heating and it's easy to be inside. So all those hundreds of thousands of years we have, I'm sure that if you asked most people, maybe even everyone from that period, what's going on in the sky right now, they'd just instantly be able to tell you that, oh, the Venus is coming up in the morning and Jupiter's in the south, that
Hmm.
kind of thing. Because that people are just so much more in touch, and it's not just because it's just because it's awe inspiring, because it's useful. People needed
Hmm.
to know where things were and things. So like astronomy, for that reason, is the oldest science, because
Hmm.
just for necessity, people
Hmm.
needed to know when to plant the crops, what time of year it was. And so astronomy has this kind of real deep, deep, deep connection with what it means to be a human and what it means to live on this planet and to be in touch with the seasons and the rhythms and and the changing nature. And so as soon as we start to introduce heating and lighting, as you say, then it's just this move away from being in touch with those rhythms and those changes. And now I suppose we don't even need to worry that it's getting colder or warmer. We just adjust our temperatures and we adjust
Hmm.
our lighting. So we're no longer like it. It's a sort of I'd say it's like a um, almost essential to our DNA of being a human. I would
Hmm.
say, to know what it is to be to look up and see the stars. I think it's one of the saddest things of our you know progress, if you like, as being humans, that we lose touch with these very natural rhythms and environments. So you ask, what can we do? I mean, I think that um, it's very, very easy, right, to be able to step outside and look and see and notice. I think people have this idea that if I want to do astronomy and I want to stargaze, it has to be the perfect dark night. And it has
Hmm.
to be really, really, I have to be
Hmm.
away from the street lights and things like that.
Sure.
But actually, what mindfulness does, so mindfulness is a practice of being present with things as they are. We're not trying to change anything. We're not trying to
Hmm.
judge it to be good or bad or the way we want it to be or not. And so if we're doing this in the spirit of mindfulness, then we just step outside and we see what we see. It's not the way it should be or shouldn't be. We just notice. And so
Hmm.
maybe it's a bit cloudy, maybe there are some stars between the clouds, maybe it's clear, but we're just like kind of inhabiting that moment. Maybe there's lots of street lights around, maybe is like noise of the sirens, or
Hmm.
whatever it might be. We're just there with things as they are, and it's like we take a little moment to slow down and to appreciate what things are like right now. And it's very different in the nighttime compared to the daytime. Like I always sort of make the analogy, like, okay, you can go out in the daytime and like people love sunbathing, right? So you know what it's like to be under the sun, to
Hmm.
feel the warmth of the
Sure.
sun and the brightness and things.
Hmm.
So what's it like at nighttime to be under like the starlight, right?
Sure.
So it feels quite a lot different, but we just forget, I think.
I think that's interesting. There's almost like this frenetic energy to change things or something that in order for you to live a meaningful life, you have to change everything or things we need to
Mm,
restore darkness. There's a call to action there. And I like this idea of when in the mindfulness moment, you just accept what is.
mm,
And that there's beauty to be found at all times around you, and with a contentness in the if your heart is in the right place, that you will find beauty in guess what, we will find beauty in the creation of electric light in a sense, although there may be, as time goes by, we may want to make those better, But I really like that idea that
That's right.
of moving away from that constant negativity of the world as such, and rather observe it as it is, so to speak.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, what can we do? Like right now, we step out tonight, right? You go
mhm.
outside. I mean, there's all the light around, and yeah, okay, it's not great, but that is what it is, right? And that's what mindfulness helps us to appreciate that tonight, right here, this is how it is, and all we can do is accept it. And actually, the more we can accept it, the more we can come into this like moment and appreciate it, the more we realize actually it is important. And
Yes.
there are some things I can do and some things I can change in the future, sure, and perhaps it even spurs us on to do something. But just right now,
Yes.
this is how it is. Mm.
I live on a farm in a rural area, very close to Toronto, though. But on a dark night, if I turn all the lights in my house off, I can see the Milky Way. It's like a
Mm.
little tiny. You can see it if you wait a bit and make sure all the lights around you are off. You can start to see it. And I took my son out, and it was interesting. We just lied on the grass. It was a cool fall evening. We laid on the grass and we just looked at the Milky Way for a while. I showed him where the North Star was. We were looking around at different constellations and that. And yeah, there wasn't. It was a real rejuvenating experience. I think about it actually every day since. I think it was about a week and a half ago. I thought that was actually really nice. That moment of time when we just accepted, hey, that's the Milky Way right there. Even though you can't see it
Mm.
that well, it's always there. It's
Yeah.
even if you can't see it. Um, Let me ask you this: is there an element, and maybe this offends your sensibilities, but is there an element of this which we can make financial? So to the mindfulness part, to the stargazing part. I know we interviewed a lady who has a business where she takes people to view the stars and that, and we
Mm.
start to see it. Is there an element of this for you, which is that this is your business, and that
Mm.
you're sharing value with people and they pay for it? You understand what I'm
Mm.
saying?
Yeah, 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 totally. Yeah, I've thought long, long and hard about that the last couple of years because I really want to. So, okay, a bit about my story, right? So, I was an astronomer, professional astronomer. I used to work in university doing research, and every now and again we'd go to these big observatories, and we'd have a few nights observing time. So, I remember a time I was in Hawaii, and I was on Mauna Kea up at one of the big telescopes, and at dusk we went into the control room. You're on the computer, and at dawn you exit the control room, and it's the lights rising. And I at that particular occasion, I didn't look at the stars with my eyes once, and it took me some years to realize what had happened. Like I'd become, like I'd just forgotten, I suppose. I'd become so involved in my research and how important that was to me, and I'd forgotten how beautiful it was and what an amazing opportunity it was to look up at the sky. And so then a few years went past. I left astronomy and I got into teaching yoga and mindfulness, and I've been bringing together these two worlds, or kind of thinking about how to bring these worlds together this last few years, and I really want to make it into something I do more. And in order to be able to do that, I need to find a way of making it pay. And I think that so far, the events that I've been running this last couple of years, people find it's just like mind blowing when you
Mm-hmm.
can contemplate your place in the universe, not just looking up at the stars, but like contemplating what it is to be a human in this vast universe, where we come from and how enormous time and space is compared to our lives and being on this planet and things like that. I think it's just so like wow for so many people that I really would love to share that so much more. And so like little guided meditations, events, and retreats and things. We had some great retreats this over the summer in Europe, darker skies. Yeah.
There's an old expression like if you can't charge for something, it has no value. I kind of hate and love that expression by definition. It's tough when people when you're speaking in this world specifically that but if somebody can guide you there, it's something that I think we need to look at as a movement. Like
Mm.
how do we fund this movement? How do we make it more available to people? By training and teaching people to do this and making it a business and a career. I mean, that's how you do it.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
I studied English lit in university, and I dropped out. Me and Elon and Mark Zuckerberg were all in the same crowd. Well, I'm not in their crowd, but we're all dropouts of the
Right.
same age and same era. But When I remember studying the English lit, and I had a childhood where I read the Bible a lot in my childhood. And I remember looking at some of the TAs and professors and saying, "You don't understand what this story is about. Like you don't know enough about the Bible to really understand what this story is about." And I think that I would make the argument that that applies to human history. If you don't understand humans' relationship to the stars, like why we sent burned lamb smoke up to heaven, like when we're making sacrifices. People used to burn things on sacrifices. The reason why they did that is because they thought their God was up there, not because during the day, maybe because during the day, but also because the night was so majestic, and they would see these different and relate
Mm,
to these different um, constellations in a way that was deeply spiritual for them. Would
mm,
you? How do we reestablish that, like in the academy or in the professional understanding of humans, that our relationship to stars is so important? I mean, the Pyramid of Giza, or the Great Pyramid, is aligned with the
mm,
center star of Orion's belt, and every 12,000 years, the Sphinx looks at the constellation Leo at the same time as it's lined up.
mm,
Like this was extremely important to us as a species. And we seem to have forgotten that or dismissed that. And I think we're missing something in
mm.
understanding ourselves. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I often say to people, okay, so of all views on this planet, since the beginning of humanity, like those 200 or 300,000 years, of all the views on this planet, every single one has changed.
Hmm.
Like sea levels have risen and fallen, there's been glaciers and volcanoes, blah, blah, blah. The only view that all humans have ever seen that's exactly the same is the night sky.
Hmm.
So that there's been some tiny little shifts and things, but basically the pattern of the constellations, the shift of the seasons, it's been the same since the beginning of and way before humanity. Like for any animals that
Hmm.
are able to look up and tune in, so like it's like more deeply ingrained in us than you know anything else on the planet because it's always been there. And I think if we can look at the stars with that view, it doesn't matter what the actual constellations are, whether it's Orion or whatever it might be, but the patterns of stars are the same. Every single human seen the same. That's like wow, really deeply connecting to me.
It's almost a part of our shared heritage as a
Mm.
species in a way. The stars come up in Egypt. They come up with the sailors in the South Pacific. I don't know if they're called Polynesians, I think is the name of their group.
Polynesians.
Yeah, where they
Mm.
would dead reckoning and stargazing. They would travel across the Pacific Ocean in a giant canoe, and
Mm.
shepherds.
And they would have had to have known the stars in
Mhm.
such detail in order to be able to sail across the Pacific. They would have
Yeah,
to like just known it, right?
that's mind blowing that they did that actually. Like there's
Mm.
so many things related to the stars and to sunsets and to the way that the sun does the seasonality of the sun and the equinoxes and all that. That's actually pretty mind blowing when you consider
Mm.
how they figured that out and their relationship to it would have been generational, like many generations to
Mm.
build that
Yeah,
knowledge and teach it and build the Stonehenge. I know there's a spot in
yeah,
Ireland too
exactly.
where on a certain time of the year the entire cave is lit up by the sun. I can't remember what it's called, but I visited it when I was younger. And all these relationships we abandoned them at our peril, Mark, and we've
Mm.
clearly abandoned them in terms of our daily lives, and like you said, and reestablish them through mindfulness. How can people keep that going in a practice? It's so chaotic and hectic. How do you coach them to continue to deal with the night and be out in the night?
So I think there are two main things that are coming up for me just as you're talking. So you've got the stories. So the stories that are connected to the constellations are humans' oldest stories, predating literature, all that stuff. And we in the West we get passed down the stories which come from Rome, Greek and Mesopotamian kind of region. But there are many, many stories from many cultures, as you say, like Polynesians and native Australians and Russians and all that kind of. They all have their own stories, and connecting, like listening to these stories, are one of the ways which we can just refine that, that connection to humanity, and perhaps even making sure they get recorded because a lot of them have lost,
Hmm.
right?
For sure.
So I think that, yeah, and then the other one would be taking away all of the stories and all of the technology and all of the apps, and all of the kind of like thought around it, and just going out, like you say, like out into a field, lie down, and we're not trying to work out what we're trying to look at. We're not trying to figure out what constellation. We're just looking, and when your eyes adjust, as you say, like you see the little bits of the Milky Way, and it's like suddenly there's this whole world opens up, this whole universe opens up, and actually, when we touch into what like this sense of awe,
Mm.
it's a true emotion, the emotion of awe, where we find something which is much, much bigger than ourselves. And we feel like this little small human on the planet's surface looking up at this vastness, that extends off to infinity. And that feeling of like, wow, is deeply important for our mental well-being, to sort of get things in perspective and just realize that there's more to it, more to this world than just my own little dramas and issues and stresses. We're living on this tiny little planet immersed in this vast cosmos. And what does that mean when I get stuck in traffic on a Monday morning?
Well, you know what? I think we can even, I think you can even, if I dare say to you, I think you can even go lower. Because oftentimes, you talk about the knowledge that we have from astronomy, like modern astronomy. The Earth spins around the sun at 14,000 kilometers an hour, and the sun spins around the Milky Way at 1115, whatever it is. All these numbers, and like the technical massiveness is known, and you can say that to people, but I don't think
Mm,
it's necessary to inspire the awe. You understand what I mean? Like our
mm,
ancestors didn't know that that light was 16 billion light years away or whatever, and they were still had their minds blown by the
yeah.
stars. And it's like it's almost like the technical can sometimes be over focused on. I'm not going to say ruin it, but we can over focus on
Mm,
how many light years away that star is, and that's the whatever nebula, and this is the thing, and it's
yeah.
this far away. I think we can get lost in that a little bit, and that's a temptation for you to be in
Yeah.
the computer room all night and not actually go outside and look. Right? We're
Exactly.
searching for
Exactly.
answers and knowledge instead of allowing our hearts to open up to the beauty of and majesty and sublimity
Mm,
of the universe.
mm, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's probably what I've experienced with many amateur stargazers as well. Like people go out in an evening and they've got their telescope and they've got their laptop and they've got little maps and apps and things, and they spend the entire, just like I did, spend the entire night taking photos and checking things, and forget to look up and appreciate. I think you're right. Yeah, yeah. And also, like, mindfulness encourages us to come into the felt sense. Like, what is
Mm.
it? What does it feel like to be here and now, looking up
Hmm.
and being in this space? And where the facts and figures take us into like the thought world, like the concept world, where we're about ideas and we're not actually experiencing it, we're just thinking about it, if you see what I mean. So if we put all of that to the side and we're just looking up and just kind of feeling, like, what does it sound like? What is the air temperature like? How my
Mm.
eyes are filled, there's a few clouds, like there's those stars there and there's a gap there, blah blah. We're not thinking about, just feeling it. That takes us into a very different space.
Mm. It's interesting, these rhythms. I wonder if there is, with this, I don't know how you feel about astrology as an astronomer. Okay. And
Mm,
so I read astrology, I get a laugh. I think for some people it's a starting point to understand themselves better, and that's where they're starting from. So it doesn't really matter whether or not it's right or not. They're just starting and they're trying to do some self exploration in that, and so that's great, good for them. I don't believe in it
mm,
necessarily. I don't know if believe in it's I don't know if we have the right word or have faith in it in any sense, but perhaps it's a starting point for them. But when I think about where astrology came from, it's kind of like alchemy.
mm,
The belief that something inhabited those constellations, or that there was messages from them, and the way humans would interact with them over their entire life. They would constantly, I'm sure many cultures have different names for constellations. Not everybody calls it Orion the Hunter, okay? So
right.
that's just what we call that particular constellation. Um, And so there's this relationship to us. We also know that some animals relate to the stars as well. Could the
Mm.
stars have played some, or the cycle of the different constellations throughout the year? Could they have played some role in our evolution? Could they have contributed to us becoming the most intelligent species on the planet? Is there something there that is missing that anthropologists and scientists haven't really hit on yet?
Let me see. Let me see if so I'm in no way qualified. I'm not an anthropologist. So let me just
This is
see.
a podcast,
Um,
folks. We're just talking. If you're listening to this, we're
yeah,
just talking.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that uh, the quest for trying to understand why we're here and where we're from is like the most fundamental of all of human questions, right? So,
Mm.
I mean, when I was working in astronomy, astronomy has no commercial use. You can't make a spin-off business from um, understanding black holes or from understanding how a star works. So it almost is like the purest of science in that sense. And whenever we had to write um, observing time requests or grant proposals and things, it was always a bit about why is this important? And when it comes down to it, when you think about it, it all comes down to this: trying to understand where we're from and why we're here.
Mm.
So I think that kind of question must have driven humanity, like through all of those thousands of years, to try to look further and look deeper, and we've got this incredible brain, and we can put it to apply it to understanding. So maybe that's like before humans were evolved, maybe the pre-humans were sort of looking up and like asking those questions, and that's what drove a little bit of maybe. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. And you talk, I don't know if it was Niels Bohr or Faraday or Einstein, but I know a lot of these guys came to a point in their career where they accepted a spiritual element to life, where they stopped trying
Mm,
to chase the answer down with a club. And John Keats talks about that negative capability, a willingness to exist in uncertainty, and when they kind of, found their way back to spirituality through physics and being exhausted in finding the answer and realizing that at the end of it is just a quest to know and why you're here and what we're doing and why this universe is the way it is. Is that what happened to you? Are you in the same boat as Niels Bohr or Albert Einstein with that?
So in my book, The Mindful Universe, I
Hmm.
actually have a whole chapter there on looking at the different view in particularly in quantum physics is very important.
Mm.
How you can look at the world in terms of separate things, or you can look at the world in terms of like waves and togetherness. Right? We've
Hmm.
got the two billiard balls crashing into each other,
Hmm.
or we've got the wave interacting and constructively interfering. It's like you could say that's the dual view and the non-dual view, like the separate things and the all as one view. And like Heisenberg was one of the particularly important guys. He thought very deeply. Actually ended up writing a couple of books which you could say were quite spiritual, because he was investigating this from a mathematical and physical point of view, and then trying to understand what it all means. And then he went off and actually spoke to some of the spiritual teachers at the time. He went to India, had to chat with a couple of guys, and actually got to the point where he realized quite some deep truths about how our perspective can get very limited in this like separate things, me being separate to the universe. And actually quantum physics itself, when we look at it in detail, it brings us right up to this: the observer makes a difference.
Yes, for
The
sure.
observer is
That's mind
part
blowing.
of it.
Yes.
Absolutely. And in Zen, we actually put this front and center, like to understand how we can see the world from this other perspective, where we are one with well, we're not separate and distinct. We're just like a different part of this whole universe. That's what they call like kind of waking up to our true selves. So we can
It's
see it through meditation, but strangely enough, we can also find it through physics.
well, what's interesting about that observer idea is, and that you mentioned it, it's almost like part of changing the world and the universe is simply observing it with humility. Like you will change it by observing it too. You don't have to do all these actions and all this kind of stuff and all the reactions that happen and the unintended consequences of whatever action you took. In some senses, we need to spend a significant amount of our times observing, and by observing, you change the universe. Like by looking at it, it changes it. That's what that's what quantum physics tells us, is it not? That by looking at the stars, you're influencing them in some way. Isn't that not true at a
So
quantum physics level?
potentially not looking at it, but being it.
Right. Yes. Being with it.
So,
Yes. Yes.
well, I think it's even more. So actually being it. So we know it's almost like a such a well-known phrase, isn't it? Like that we are made of stardust.
Yes. We are golden. We're
So
billion-year-old carbon. Yes. Yeah, from the great song.
exactly. So our entire body is made of material that was once synthesized inside stars, or indeed actually at the Big Bang itself. So we're not just looking at, when we look up at the night sky and we see stars, we're not looking at something which is out there. This is something I try to emphasize, on the evenings where I do these mindful stargazing events. Like, we're not looking at something which is out there. We are it. We are in it, and we are actually it ourselves. Like, the universe is not something miles above us. And if you start to see, like, us as a human on this planet's surface, and a planet orbiting the sun in the galaxy in the universe, it's like, you know, where's the separation? Where does it become me and it? It's false.
That's where that's where all this, it's a wet rock spinning a nuclear fission reactor in the center of the universe. I think all the science can clog up what's actually happening in a way. Too much. Yes, it's not separate. It is where you are now, or even part of what you are is, and maybe it
Exactly.
is what you are is,
It
and
is
that
what you are.
I think that's what our ancestors knew. And all the parsing, like you said, all the parsing of distances, and there's an exoplanet around that one, and there's here comes a comet over here, and the comet's traveling 16,000 miles per second or whatever, all these numbers. And I think that takes away from it at times. Not all the time, but I think sometimes it robs us of the experience of it, the distances and all that. And I think it's important that what you're saying. I want to talk a little bit about these waves and that perspective, like looking at the universe from an integrated perspective. That not trying to figure out this one point or over specializing on this one point.
Yeah.
In this circadian, there's a movement right now in the lighting industry, which I work in, and that's like this circadian thing. And the solution in the lighting industry to people having problems with electric light and not receiving enough natural light is more electric light. And I think to myself, like, that's an over focus on, can we, or like a sales pitch or something that's
Right.
not actually interested in solving the problem. What we need is more natural light and natural darkness to solve our circadian rhythm problems. We need to reconnect to the outside of the building. The inside of the building is never going to do that for us. It's almost like an erroneous perspective. And I feel like your mindfulness, what you're talking about there, is really where the lighting industry, sure, we need good lighting for everybody, but maybe we need to back away from some of these industrial claims or these commercial claims that we're making as an industry, and change our focus away from that and allow people, and this is what I'm calling for in the 21st century, is the lighting industry to become the lighting and darkness industry, and that we provide both. We don't, both are commodities that can be bought and sold. And so is that part of that mindfulness play where it's like there's too much focus on selling a light fixture here when we're trying to solve circadian rhythm issues, and maybe the lighting industry should back away from that and allow the mindfulness movement to move into that space? Is that something that you're vibing with me on, or do I have the words wrong? You know what I'm saying? I think you know what I'm kind of throwing the ball at anyway.
mm, 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 mm. Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot there around. Like we've got a little baby, right? So 6 months, our little
Hmm.
baby, and this is our first child. And a lot of the books say, in the middle of the day, he
Congratulations, by
needs
the
to
way.
be out. Oh, thanks. Yeah, he needs. So he needs to be out in the bright sunlight
Mm.
in order to help him to sleep at night time.
Hmm.
And I think you read that in the book, you're like, well, surely that applies to everyone. Okay, so babies can't take themselves out into the daylight,
Hmm.
so we have to do it for them. But we're all humans. It helps us to sleep at night if we're out in the daylight, in the daytime, and we get a good bit of bright sunlight. And then it also helps us to sleep well if we're in the darkness before going to bed. We turn the lights down, blah blah. So I think it's just like kind of waking up to these natural rhythms and tuning in more to what my body is wanting and needing and what it says. Like if I go to bed, I just turn off the bright light and I go into my bedroom.
Hmm.
Then is that different to if I have like the lights going lower and I spend some time outside and maybe I walk the dog or whatever and then I go inside? How does my body experience that as something different? It's not a thought, it's a feeling. I'm tuning
Hmm.
into my body and
Hmm.
what it's saying. So I think the more we can do that, the more we can align ourselves with what we need rather than like what I've read in the book.
Hmm.
So I think that's what mindfulness brings to this.
I think there needs to be a corporate mindfulness movement but something has to inflect into this, into the lighting industry, because a lot of times people in lighting industry say, well, the darkness has nothing to do with us. That's not even our
Uh,
business.
uh,
And it's like, well, I'm not so sure about that, because the whole existence is for you to remove darkness. Um, but
mm.
if you look at the
This
trajectory,
I'm sorry to
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but it reminds me quite a lot of the difference. So Western people have created constellations in the stars from like joining the dots.
hmm,
This star to that star to that star. Now, there's an amazing constellation that was known to the native Australian Aboriginal people that you see in the Milky Way in the dark. So it's in the dark lane, the dust lanes of the Milky Way. They call it the what's it called? The emu. The emu. And
okay,
actually, when you see it, it's like the Coalsack Nebula, and then a little bit of beak, and then you go down through. It stretches down the Milky Way, and you see this shape of the emu. And when you see that, you're like, oh my god, a constellation that's not in stars but in the reverse image, right? So in the
yes,
in the negative, you see it in the dark, and it's that kind of change of perspective, I suppose, with what
mm,
you're talking about there.
yes.
Lighting industry's got nothing to do with light, not darkness at all, but actually just flip everything around.
Yes,
Mm.
exactly. That's exactly. At first I thought, well, this is a 5 to 10 years. We'll get this done. I think this is the issue for the 21st century for the lighting industry. To really embrace this, it's going to take a long time, and I think it's going to acquire like a corporate mind, or like a mindfulness, to descend on the industry, and to accept this as a moral duty, as an ethical duty, and something that we charge for. Which is, a lot of people don't like to muddy things with money, but you know what?
Mm.
That's how we transact. That's how we make changes. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
Mark needs to pay for that little guy or like gal that you got. You got to pay for the
Got little
diapers,
guy. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
now I have 4 kids. If you told my wife when they were little that, that she takes them outside every day, or those kids are going to go back. I don't care if it's 6 feet of snow outside. They're putting their snowsuits
Mm.
on and they're going outside, because they absolutely have to go outside, or kids go crazy. But you're right. What's the difference between us? The goose and the gander are the same thing. We need to be outside more. I think that's
Mm.
from all the circadian people that I've interviewed, everybody else, it comes down to, you need light. Natural sunlight during the day cannot be recreated with electricity. I'm sorry to
Mm.
the lighting industry. You're never going to accomplish that. And natural darkness at night cannot be recreated
Mm.
using, or be mimicked, or it should not be polluted with devices and artificial light. Otherwise, you're going to cause yourself damage. Mark, tell
Mm.
me final thoughts here. We're coming up on 40 minutes. We like to kind of keep it in that range,
Sure.
and that. Any advice from your mindfulness perspective first for the lighting industry? What can we learn from your practice and your books?
Mm. So I think every person who works in the industry, it's important to spend some time considering and appreciating and acknowledging what it's like in their natural environment, like just where they live and where they work and things like that, and opening their eyes, I suppose, and just looking around. Um, I often walk past. Yeah, it's a very good question, isn't it? It's a tricky one.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So you can chop this bit out, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah,
yeah, you're being vulnerable.
yeah.
Like I think that that's okay. That's people love that. I mean, people are often afraid to be vulnerable, and there's not. That's what people love about podcasts is the vulnerability. You
Mm.
know, I'll say this, and I'm going to close the show up, but I'm going to keep talking to you because I know I have another 5 minutes with you till noon my time. So I'm gonna hang on to you for a
Yeah.
little bit longer. But I think what I would like to see is acceptance in the lighting industry for the natural cycles of the world that cannot be replicated. There's never any way that we can replicate them. And we need to where we can reestablish those rhythms. We have a moral obligation to do so, not just to our human beings, but to the animals and the wildlife of the world as well
Mm.
that are out there. And so that's what I'm taking from what we've talked about. I'm going to close the show up, but I'm going to come back to you. So I'm going to talk to a little bit about Mark. I got 5 more minutes of his time. I'm going to talk to a little bit about something else he has in his bio here that doesn't relate to darkness. So if you made it all the way to the end here, thanks for listening. Evluma's the sponsor. Go to evluma.com. But I'm going to come back to Mark right now. I want to talk to him about difficult people. And there's 5 minutes
Mm.
left in this show here, and I saw that it doesn't really relate to dark skies, but I
Yeah, yeah,
got you now.
yeah.
I don't know if I'm ever going to see you again, so I want to talk to you. Give me the Coles notes on that, and how do we deal with difficult people? How do we know if we're one of
Mm.
them?
Yeah. Well, that's a big one, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So, in one of the most important teachings I've listened to, I suppose, in my Zen practice, has been about how to deal with other people, how to deal with relationships, and particularly when they get really quite tricky. So, most of the time, we're trying to avoid, or we're trying to like basically like get rid of all the difficult people in our life.
Hmm.
But actually, those encounters with difficult people, they show us such a lot about our habits and our tendencies, and because the emotional temperature is really high in those,
Mm-hmm.
much higher than other situations. And it could be like your partner, right? It could be your
Mm-hmm.
mum. It could be like someone at work. All these people that we find difficult in different situations. It's because the intensity goes up and our emotions go up, and we immediately react, often out of like habits and tendencies. So when we look at these difficult encounters with the perspective of, oh, I could learn something here. This is an opportunity to learn something about me, about how I am, and also once I've tuned into how I am, I could act differently. I could do something different. I could be kinder. I could be more understanding. Then actually that perspective can change a lot. So it's kind of, we have this phrase. They're a troublesome Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
In Zen they talk about a troublesome Buddha. So it's like a Buddha as in a teacher that appears in a troublesome form, in a difficult form, that's here to maybe highlight something about ourselves.
That reminds me of Arthur Schopenhauer, I think is the guy's name, where he says that all human emotions should be not reacted to but looked upon with curiosity. I thought that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
interesting. Like, why is this person acting? And there's a sense that when you have these difficult relationships, we can always, like, I don't know if you've ever, met a married couple that's struggling. And then you sit down with
Mm,
the fella and he starts telling you about how awful his wife is. But if you actually watch them interact, there's like a negative dance going on between them. You know
mm,
what I'm saying? It's like
mm.
there's like they know what the other person's going to do in a sense. And I think you're right about that. If we engage in these things and you're in a difficult situation, to not step away from it, but maybe try to turn your emotions off a little bit and see what's actually going on in that dynamic. Is that what you're
So
suggesting?
So we jump into this very initial hard stance of like, you're wrong and I'm right.
Yes.
That's what often happens. Like, you meet someone in the supermarket and they annoy you. Like, you're in the wrong. You're the problem. And actually, it's not you and me. It's the space in between. Like, it's the relationship. And it's this situation that's causing. So I'm reacting to something that you're doing. It's not necessarily that you're doing something wrong. It's my reaction to your behavior. So then it becomes just like, oh, it's not you necessarily, but it's us.
Yes.
And it's this situation. So then you're exactly right. So we turn into this curiosity, like, oh, what's happening here? Why am I reacting like this? And suddenly that can change everything.
I think it's also interesting to ask why the other person is reacting that way. And
that exactly, yeah.
And then am I giving bad facial expressions? All of a sudden, to be aware of what's happening in those situations, again, changes them permanently. Once you're aware of what's happening, now you can execute. Now you can maybe change the dynamic of the direction.
Yeah.
One of the things that I don't know if you have any knowledge on this, but one of the things that I've noticed in acrimonious situations, I've come to this belief where I feel as if people that are in acrimonious relationships, you may just laugh at this, or maybe you'll have a comment on it or not, but I feel that at a certain point they come to enjoy, I say that in quotations for the listeners, enjoy resentment, and they come to dislike doing something nice for that person. Like the emotions they're feeling is like, I can't wait to be upset at my husband or my wife or whatever, or my brother or whatever. And if it makes me feel alive when I'm angry at my mom and I'm blaming her for my life or whatever. And it's like, well, why don't you send your mom flowers? I don't want to do that. She might like it. It might make her happy. Like, I almost believe people get into those situations.
Totally.
So
you're absolutely right. Totally right. Yeah. So technically, if someone has identified with that negative emotion, and they identify it with themselves. So it's basically like, I am an angry person, and if I'm not angry, I'm not myself. That's what happens. And so people kind of like wallow in it, or like kind of really.
Yes, they enjoy it in a way. Like I'm putting enjoyment.
That's right.
Yes.
No, you're right. You're right.
And it's like it's so sad actually. When you see it, and then someone passes away and they just can't. They regret all the wasted years of, like, who cares what happened in Christmas 1985? I'm being honest when I say that. I mean, some people have had serious trauma, but really, for most of us, it doesn't really matter all that much, Mark, Now, I've kept you for 2 minutes longer than I booked. I could keep going for a little bit longer if you don't mind.
That's fine. I'm in no rush, but it's again, it comes down to this awareness, right? So we see the patterns that we always come back to, and then when we see it, then we then have a choice to change it. But if we're not seeing it, then we're just stuck in this unconscious, like, repeating patterns. And that's really the foundation of all, like, meditation practice of Zen, mindfulness, is to bring more and more attention and awareness, not judging. It's not wrong, but it's just noticing. And the more we can see, the more we can then affect change.
Well, become the observer. Check out Mark's books. The Mindful Universe, Mindful Thoughts for Stargazers, Zen and the Art of Dealing with Difficult People, and Stars, a Practical Guide to the Key Constellations. Are they available on Amazon, Mark?
Yep.
They're available on Amazon. You can go to his website, markwestmoquette.co.uk. That's markwestmoquette.co.uk. And of course, thanks for listening. If you made it to the end, I've really enjoyed this my time with Mark, and I hope one day I'm over I think he's in England. He could be somewhere else. I didn't ask him, but hopefully we can shake hands and meet. For the rest of you out there, I love you guys. Bye for now.
Look no further for dark sky friendly products than Evluma. Since its first product launch, Evluma has carried one or more International Dark Sky Association certified models. If your customer cares about light pollution, suggest the OmniMax with shielding or the AreaMax with full cutoff to reduce uplight and glare. Evluma, illuminating the pursuit of darkness.